I have invited Yvonne to come and talk with me during this first session of my own at the Arts Forum. And I've done so because she is a woman artist whose work I have followed with particular interest for a number of years, and because also she is someone who, beginning as a dancer, evolving as, in my own view, the most significant and innovative thinker about dance. She has both been very much at the center of a number of interesting developments in the arts and has herself evolved across the boundaries which tend in our culture to separate one art from the other. She has been, as I say, dancing and thinking about dancing. She has taught. She has worked with artists, particularly sculptors, and she has as well, in recent years, turned to making a film. She's completed one and is at the moment involved in finishing another. And it seemed to me that we might begin to talk first about the way in which she was led to work in film after having given enormous amounts of energy and a great deal of thought to dance. Yvonne, what did lead you to work in film?
Well, starting from where I am now, you might, on a very simple level, all I did was tip up the floor to make a vertical plane rather than a three-dimensional horizontal plane.
Do you mean that, or is that a very nice and elaborate metaphor?
In a way, it's true. I've become much more fastidious in working on this second film, in framing the image. It took me, I think, the whole duration of that first film, which incidentally is called Lives of, did you mention that? Lives of Performers?
No, I didn't, thank you.
And I didn't really see through the viewfinder until I started working on this film. I work with a camera woman, Babette Mangold. And the way it looks, the precisely what is seen and what is not seen, maybe that could be talked about as the difference between dancing and film. And one reason I got into film is that I could control what is seen and what is not seen by the viewer in a much more rigorous and precise fashion. Whereas in a dance situation, I always worked with things going on at the same time. And even if there is a central focus, when you work with dance, the eye can wander to the decor, to the other people in the audience, to there isn't this highly focused narrowing down of an image, and I've gotten very interested in that. And I started to do this some years ago when I used very simple films as an accompaniment to dance, and they're mainly used to blow up parts of the body. For instance, I would make one of the first films I made was with cameraman Bud Wirtschafter. It was basically a volleyball and a pair of legs, mine, seen from the knee down, and the volleyball would be rolled into the frame, and when it came to rest, the legs would walk into the frame and stand by the ball, and there would be a jump cut to another shot, an empty frame, or rather just the floor, volleyball comes in again. And juxtaposed to this was a dance for 5 people moving around as a herd, doing things, moving as a single unit with different things operating within the group. And the group would constantly come to rest behind the screen which was downstage center. So at times you would see the real legs of the performers beneath the raised screen and the huge enlarged legs of the film image. So I was playing around with film in this way for a while, and gradually what happened was I became less interested in the body and what it can do, and more interested in a kind of experience that could best be, or I felt could best be expressed verbally, and that was the content of emotional life and intimate relations and a very private experience. And I felt that dance could only express this in a very general or metaphorical way, and I wanted to become more specific, and using starting from a literary point of view seemed the best way to do this.
I remember your work using film to point, in a sense, to very specific functions of the body. And I remember, too, thinking recently, while I was preparing to write about your work, that there is a very particular relationship that has generally been maintained in the use of film for dance. That is one of the interesting things about the media of film in relation to dance, is that it generally is involved with a kind of respect of what we call the spatiotemporal integrity. That is, the full extent, both of the time and the space in which dance or choreography takes place, so that it can be seen. One knows, for example, that a man like Nureyev, when he's interested in filming the big kind of ballets in the repertory, the work of Petipa, which he has done recently in The Sleeping Beauty, and also I think Don Quixote, was very insistent about keeping the camera in such a way that is using long shots and medium shots, for example, so that the body would be seen to its advantage against the space of the dance and the theater. And what happens, of course, is that you become aware, if you watch a ballet filmed like Don Quixote, that actually the plot of the ballet itself doesn't require that kind of treatment, but it's the ballet movement which does require it. That is, it is the dancer and the dancer seen as against that whole theater space and his body performing in that space. It's a whole tradition of performance which requires that. Whereas I think what happened in your work was that you were increasingly involved, at least in one respect, in a kind of analysis of the function of the body. And therefore, your film style, when it came along, could assume an analytic function. Therefore, you could break up the body, you could break up the dance. And that probably led you much more easily into what I might call a more intransigently or radically cinematic style than would have been possible if you had been still concerned with performance in its relationship to film as much. And that struck me very much when I was watching your film, as against watching other dance films, which I've done.
Well, I've always been involved in breaking up continuity in some way. And speaking of Don Quixote, it's very apparent that continuity of the steps has to be maintained, and the only a concession to filmmaking is to heighten the drama by going in for close-ups. There are a lot of close-ups in that film when
that's right.
Helpman falls off the windmill, and that you don't get in the theater, of course.
Those close-ups occur simply because they are involved with miming. They're involved with the dramatic. They're not involved with the kind of principal main line of dancing. And I think that at one point you must become aware that there was a way in which, apart from the fact that you were not really concerned with the body as much, you're concerned with narrative, nevertheless a kind of analytic style that you had applied to the use of the body could be carried over into your new concern, or at least that's how it seemed to me.
I would elaborate on that. I feel a new pressure that is I would say, is anti-didactic. I always, in my dancing, I think that kind of analysis you speak of took the form of repetition, of working out, say, variations on a theme. I hate to say that because at one point I was very opposed to theme and variations, but let's call them possibilities, working out all the possibilities of a given set of implications. Like this, I'll stay with this original description of this herd of people moving around. I worked out a series of floor patterns for them, a series of movements. Each person in the group learned his own series. Some of them overlapped. And there was a fairly thorough examination of all the implications of those interactions of people doing different things within the group, and the possibilities for the group moving across the entire space of the stage in various kinds of ways, loops and diagonals, and it was mainly diagonals and changing directions in the middle of the stage and coming to rest behind the film. And the length, I've been accused of my work at times being too long. I had this feeling that the length was predicated on a certain, it was a very subjective relationship to time. It took the audience that long to really know what was happening, which has, a lot of people disputed with me. But now, Lives of Performance is a very episodic film in the way my dances were, composed of these sections which have their own nature, and then there's a change, and there's another section that has a kind of unity within it. And Lives of Performers is very much like that. It has this episodic quality. There's a rehearsal, and then there's an examination of photos with a voiceover, and then there is a section with a lot of camera movement and close-ups, and then there's a section where people sit around and talk a lot, and so forth. And the movement and the narrative comes in from the speech of the performers who actually made the narration by looking at the film before it had the soundtrack and interpreting what went on. And now it's much more complicated, what I'm trying to do. It's a moment-by-moment connecting up of much smaller units of material, and using very fragile kinds of transitions, like, for one thing, I'm using intertitles, subtitles, voiceover, sync sound. And I had begun to use intertitles in the last film. But now, I'll describe something just to illustrate my point. Let's see, there's a sequence where you see a very quick succession of stills from Psycho, where Janet Leigh gets stabbed in the bathtub, and there are about 40 of them. And during, maybe after 4 of them, the voiceover comes on, and it's my voice, and reads a paragraph. She stumbled out of the theater. Her disgust with the film and fatigue drove her body into the street, and she went, and blah, blah, blah. She went looking in the town for her hotel. And finally, she saw a landmark, a huge gas storage gas storage tank that revealed to her she was just a few blocks from her hotel, and she went to the directly to the hotel, reluctant to terminate walking in the sleeping town, but willing to take care of her bodily needs, something like
Yes.
that. And okay, that goes on during this succession of slides. So the implication is that this woman had seen that movie. You can make that connection. After the slides, or it's not slides, it's cuts. Then there are 4 more photographs you see, and they're full frame. They occupy the whole frame. It ends with Janet Leigh's head, a close-up of her head on the bathroom floor. Cut to a nighttime scene of a long shot, a woman coming diagonally toward the camera at night,
Yes.
walking. It illustrates what the previous voiceover said. Just before that shot is over, there's a subtitle that says, she groans at the pros, P-R-O-S, dash. That's all you see.
Yes.
The shot ends, the image goes off, and you see black, but you still see that subtitle. So there's the shot, then the subtitle, during the shot, the subtitle with just black frame. And then you see the intertitle that finishes up the sentence. Pecked. You just read, she groans at the prospect of...
P-E-C-T.
P-E-C-T. She groans at the prospect of, I forget what it was, of analyzing blah, 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 some reflection about the rich and the powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And the next intertitle is Meanwhile.
Mm-hmm.
So at each stage, I have this collection of material that is short paragraphs, long paragraphs, very long takes. There are some 10-minute, there's a 10-minute shot and a 7-minute shot. And the voiceover is kind of fitted in, sometimes during the shot, sometimes overlapping into the next shot. And I've become fascinated with the different ways of leading not only the eye, but the total perception of a continuity of a fictional development, a fictional form from one thing to another, using very different materials. I mean, the images themselves don't always relate to each other.
Yes. I think before we began talking, you mentioned casually that you were going to Australia, and that you were going actually with an exhibition which had been organized by the Museum of Modern Art, in the course of which you were to do a performance which it would itself involve the presentation of this new film or its material. And you began to tell me about the exhibition, and I said that it was interesting that you had been asked to go in that particular company. I think you said it's an exhibition of contemporary painting and sculpture.
Yeah. I don't know exactly how I fit in with this particular visual installation.
How would you describe the visual installation?
Oh,
Who are the artists and what is
artists?
its focus?
There are a large number of people in it. It's Dorothea Rockburn, Saul LeWitt, Robert Morris, I think Mel Bachner, Carl Andre, people who are known as minimal artists. I don't regard myself as I've been put in that company, and I guess my early dances, I wrote articles that sort of put me in that framework.
Well, one knows about the imprecision and the lack of exactitude that go, in these very grand kind of general historical and stylistic classifications. But it is a fact that you began to do your work, and your work began to mature at a certain time and within a certain milieu and in some relationship to this work.
Yeah.
And
I think it's diverged tremendously.
I think so too.
Yeah.
But I think it might be interesting to sort of reflect as at this point about the ways in which it actually did converge. Your interest did converge upon those of men who were at that time in their early 30s for the most part, and women, I suppose, but fewer of those, and who were working in the modes that were known as minimalist in sculpture and painting. What actually was involved in your own work, essentially, which seemed to relate to that? This would be in the early and mid-60s.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier, that kind of analysis of a very reduced reality. In my case, the body. A very austere relation to traditional things like development and climax. Which, in a very general way, related to sculpture being done at that time, like in kind of austerity, lack of embellishment, unitary kind of image, mathematical concerns. You could talk about this.
I suppose. No, certainly not. But I think all those things are true. I think also the analytic quality of all the work had a particular self-consciousness as well, and which and the concern with the body and the body's relationship, not only in terms of dance movement, but of, say, the body's relationship to sculpture, a kind of reconsideration of the notion of anthropocentrism as a kind of motif for sculptural creation and sculptural experience. But
yes, many sculptors were concerned with the non-monumentality. I mean, the doing work that seemed within the scale of the human body.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that what you meant?
Yes, it is what I mean. And also, as I remember, of course, what was so important for myself in the discovery of that was the way in which this sculpture presupposed a relationship of the body, of the spectator himself to the sculpture. I mean, when you walked into a gallery and you saw an early Morris piece, you were very conscious of what was at that time felt to be kind of co-presence of oneself with the sculpture in a given space, rather than simply looking at a David Smith or a Bernini.
Yeah, right.
That was very important. And it seemed to me that there was in that perhaps a kind of carryover in the dance with respect to the situation of the audience, because there was a sense in which the dance spectator's physicality was challenged in a way that it is not, let us say, by a balletic performance, which takes place at such distance technically from his own possibilities. That is, the notion of using either ordinary gesture or movement or task performance gestures or movements also meant that you were working in a domain of gesture which was closer to the actual possibilities of the spectator himself. Yesterday I went to see the New York City Ballet, as I go very, very often. Oh, I saw this fantastic program. It had Balanchine's reworking of La Source to music by Delibes, his new variations on A Door and a Sigh. It had
A Door and a Sigh?
Yes.
What is that? I've never heard of that.
Oh, it's to a concrete score by Pierre Henry, and it's very it's a very curious work. It reminds one of all kinds of things that were taking place in Berlin and New York in the 1930s. It's very, you should see it. And it had Stravinsky Momentum and Pro Gesualdo, and it also had the Von Schoenberg Quartet. It was a huge program. And the point is that at every point in that program, as at every point when I go to see the New York City Ballet, I am watching a movement which is sublimated in that it's not only tremendously refined, but it takes place at a complete remove, from any kind of area of gesture or motion that I myself
available to you.
Yeah, that is available to me.
But yet you hear, you hear ballettomanes talk about the kinesthetic response, kinesthetic empathy, you know, which is the great appeal of any kind of dance on one level. But it's true that the kind of dance that I was involved with was very much an examination of collecting things that anyone could do. Of course, what came into what made the difference was that the particular accumulation and coordination required to do these things in a given time sequence.
And the way in which they are organized to form a kind of structure. And it struck me also that in your film work, that is, the material that you use is very daily, very banal material. It's very much the stuff of a certain kind of modest existence, actually, in Soho.
Why do you talk about that in your article?
Because because it is for me
Soho
very much infused with that somehow, and possibly
it's terrible.
Well, it's not terrible. No, it's not terrible. It would seem to me wrong, you know, to deny that one is of a certain person of a certain place at a certain time. But it has to me, in any case, the quality of a certain kind of modest, almost banal everyday existence of encounters and questionings and a lot of personal experience that is used.
Why is that restricted to Soho?
I didn't say it was restricted, but it carries for me the mark, a certain kind of mark of Soho.
You mean uptown people don't meet each other on the street
of course they do.
Have secret thoughts and
of course they do. But, I mean, the point about Soho is that it's part of a big middle class New York. But
I'm not convinced.
But it takes place in a loft space. It's very much it has that kind of austerity.
The loft space.
Yes,
yeah,
of course.
I see.
I mean, how can it not?
Right. Right. Yeah, well, that's by default. I had no other place to do it.
You're not being either reproached or praised for it. I mean,
I respect your intention, but of course I would like the work not to be so parochial, you know.
I don't think that it's parochial, you know, any more than something that comes out of Berlin 1932 is parochial. I am Annette Michelson, and I'm talking this evening with Yvonne Rainer. We began, Yvonne, to talk about your work as it evolved in relation to that of a group, or rather, one might even say a generation, of people working in the visual arts, and particularly in sculpture. But it seems to me, of course, that you did not evolve as a lone dancer and choreographer in that milieu, that your work had begun with a consideration of the work of other dancers, that it was done partly in collaboration with other dancers, that you were involved in a period of serious thinking about dance, which began in the early 60s. And it seems to me that in order to understand your work, one has to think a little bit about that period and about the work of other people. Most of them have, I think, stayed with the dance, their own ideas about dance and what performance is, about the role of the performer, have evolved, but they have stayed more or less within an area which they have extended but not deserted, or not crossed over, in a sense, as you have.
Yeah, most of the people I started out with are still very involved in performing, in their work, incorporating their own physical presences. I guess Deborah Hay is one of the exceptions to this, and she established this at a very early point in the middle 60s. She decided she didn't like performing that much and stayed out of her work. I find I am less and less interested in that end of it myself, and in the film, this present film, I am in about 3 shots. For particular reasons, I felt that my presence was necessary to get the kind of response from the other performers that I wanted. It was sort of a verite situation.
Mm-hmm.
The people I started out with are all have sort of concretized or their individual directions. They're all doing very different things, but.
And that would involve, for example, apart from Deborah Hay, it would involve
Steve Paxton and Judith Dunn and Tricia Brown, David Gordon, Barbara Lloyd.
Mm-hmm.
They are very involved in movement and in some kind of working out of an existence in the presence of other people.
Yes.
I would say, yeah.
That is moving from perhaps a notion of choreography as fixed form into a kind of evolution of choreography through interaction.
Yeah, and they're all involved in with some degree of improvisation, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It takes very different forms, but like Steve is involved in a kind of gymnastic exploration. He calls it soft contact, and it uses his skills that he had quite early. He was a tumbler in Arizona,
mm-hmm.
and he has actually taught untrained people without any acrobatic skills to do quite extraordinary things.
One thing that strikes me about this group is that of all the kinds of workers in the arts, of all the groups of workers in the arts that I can think of, they are perhaps the most disenfranchised economically and socially. That is, they are a quite extraordinary phenomenon. I remember that when I was growing up, it was one of the great and quite accurate generalizations about the life of the artist in America that he was very isolated, and that to be an artist in America was to assume a kind of active isolation and alienation. What happened, I think, very largely through the growth of the prestige internationally of American painting, was that some kind of context was created so which could afford a kind of home, in a sense, for workers in the arts, and a kind of crossing over boundaries began to happen in the late 50s and early 60s. And so it was that painters of the generation of Rauschenberg and Johns in particular, and began to be involved with dances, with Cunningham. The movement of the happenings began to involve painters and visual arts in performance.
John, did you say Johns? He never was. Oh, you mean his working with
Cunningham?
Yeah, right.
Yes, right. And yes, he did decor. No, he did decors for Cunningham. And that created, as it were, kind of precedent for some kind of fusion of action. But that, on the whole, what has happened is that although there is no longer that sense of solitariness and singleness, in a way, we are talking about dancers who do not have that kind of financial and social support from the society that, let us say, American ballet and finally American dance under the aegis of Martha Graham and her generation and succeeding of generations of people who work in that tradition have gained. We are talking about people who are now in their late 30s, mid-30s to 40s, existing within a very affluent culture and working yet very innovatively and very, very precariously. And rethinking the notion of performance perhaps so radically that they cannot pretend to have, they cannot claim the support from an audience which is itself called into question by what they do. And I know that at one time, and indeed for a long time, you were not someone who earned your living by what you do, though I suppose you do now. But it came later.
Well, it varies now. What is available to dancer or artists, choreographers, dancers in my position is public subsidy, grants, public and private foundations. Or I very early decided I would not go a certain route, which was to establish what was always available to the modern dancer, and Graham did it very early, and Merce Cunningham did it, is establish a very stable group of people called a company, through which you can develop your ideas and be responsible for in terms of becoming, incorporating, becoming nonprofit, making your situation one where you can function like a kind of business. And that is still very precarious for a lot of people.
Well, for Cunningham and Gray, by the way, it would also be, if they wished it, a way of perpetuating their own work beyond the bounds of their own particular career. I mean, one knows, of course, that Graham has very ambivalent feelings about that, and perhaps Cunningham does as well. But one thing about having a company is that you establish through repetition, through tours, you establish a tradition of performance of your own choreography, which outlasts the limits of your own career. And that is not really something that perhaps until making film you seem to be much concerned with. Obviously in film you perpetuate par excellence what you're involved in doing.
Right. I never wanted to repeat work. Once it was done, I wanted to go on. The exception is the last live show I did, called This Is the Story of a Woman Who, which is sort of a synthesis of 10 years' work. It has the very first dance I ever did in it. It has a dance from the middle of my career called Trio A, which you called my signature. And this is the first work, and there are reasons I have, there are other reasons besides liking the work. One is it's a very economic, it's feasible economically to tour with this work. It has a very small cast, and there are no great expenses in touring with it.
But working now in film, do you feel that kind of commitment to the perpetuation, the fixing of something, the making of an object?
I've gotten used to that notion. After Lives of Performers, I was, or during it, I was a little shaky about that. How would I feel about, you see, one advantage of being a dancer is you never, once you drop a work, no one ever knows about it again, and it can have a reputation or be forgotten or whatever. It becomes a myth. Like, I like to talk to people who remember Graham when she first performed in the 30s, and the myth is possibly better than the original fact. That's beside the point, perhaps. But I never minded, and I guess I liked that the business of your past being wiped out. But after I had made that first film, I had such a change of heart about that. I felt so proud. I had a whole different sense of pride in an accomplishment, this product that would be around. Even though I have grave reservations about the film now, and I feel my ideas have matured fantastically since making it, I still like to see it, and I'm glad that it exists as and represents something some accomplishment. And so I have gotten very used to that idea. I was going to say about but this business of financing, not making a living from what you do. Miss Cunningham, who is one of the most renowned modern dancers, the most probably in the world, must still, to qualify for certain public monies, must still work far more than he would if he, the requirements of being eligible for these monies is just backbreaking. It's just
I know that is so, and also one must realize
very
that
unreasonable. And,
these subsidies came very late to Cunningham. That it's a matter of the last 5 years, essentially, that Cunningham's renown is worldwide, and that he is indeed eligible for the honors, which the society accords to a very privileged few of its artists. And it has always been my feeling, since I came to know your work and the work of your contemporaries, which is a post-Cunningham generation in the mid-60s, that America reproduces in the area of dance a kind of class society, and that the kind of work that you are involved with and the general direction and thrust of the work of your contemporaries is by no means the favored class, that you really do constitute a kind of proletariat. Cunningham perhaps having access to middle-class benefits, and the New York City Ballet and Graham perhaps are particularly favored. There seems to be a definite kind of tripartite class structure that obtains.
And the rewards, the highest rewards monetarily go to the largest companies that have been institutionalized for a number of years. So it being an independent, I'm in an especially, I might say, unique position now. I mean, not only was I an independent choreographer, but I'm in the process, perhaps in the process of changing my field. I'm not saying I'm giving up performance, because periodically it still seems to interest me, but that's a very precarious prospect in terms of...
It is indeed, because I have been, as you know, probably even more centrally and consistently concerned with what happens in film in this country than I have with dance. And I'm very aware of the fact that the situation of the independent filmmaker in this country is positively heroic. That is, he is forced into a kind of heroism, which is not really being modified by very much by organizations like the National Endowment for the Arts. And the men who created a tradition of independent filmmaking in this country, and one thinks of men like Brakhage, for example, are exemplary in the kind of effort of will involved to sustain a career of filmmaking over 20 years, and the cost is enormous emotionally and in every other way. And it seems to me that it is very interesting that a woman at kind of mid-career, as I suppose you are in a sense, I don't, who has worked in one medium which is extremely precarious and for which, let us say, the rewards are very minimal, enter another field in which, as a woman, you will have double difficulties as a woman independent filmmaker. I do think so. So that I think that...
Could you elaborate on that? I mean, I know there are not, for instance, there are no, starting at the top, there are no female Hollywood directors, right? Ida Lupino.
There have been a number.
In America,
but they're relatively
Europe,
few, of course.
In
Europe there have been more. And I think that what is interesting, of course, is that the history of, say, revolutionary societies has inscribed with it an attempt to give women filmmakers their place. I mean, far more women involved in serious and responsible positions in filmmaking, directing, editing, and so on. Let's say in the early years of the Soviet Union, than there were at that time in the United States. But I think it's also true that there have been relatively few women involved in independent filmmaking on a really innovational level in America. There simply have not been a great many. There are some, and of course there is the first and most seminal instance, that of Maya Deren, who turned from a preoccupation with dancing, by the way, to filmmaking.
As Shirley Clark
and Shirley Clark, neither of whom I think were as deeply engaged, nor as accomplished, by the way, as dancers or choreographers as yourself, but women who were led, in any case, from one temporal medium to another, and who were both, in their ways, certainly involved in innovational filmmaking. But the process has been mostly for women here to try and integrate themselves into commercial filmmaking, or into those aspects of kind of parallel filmmaking, television, documentary, and so on, which are less concerned with radical cinematic innovation. The women artists in film have been relatively few, just as the women in commercial film.
Well, there's also a phenomenon now of women in the plastic arts, the other visual arts, making film. Like I think of Joyce Whelan and Nancy Grace.
Yes, of course.
There must be others.
There are
who subsidize their filmmaking with their other work.
Yeah.
Which I am now doing. I mean, I find myself in that position also, touring with my last live show to finance the filming.
And your new film then is not yet edited, but is in the process of being edited.
It's nearly all shot. I have one more outdoor scene to do, and I have to go out to Montauk and get some footage of the ocean, and it's not edited. I'm about to put together a roughly edited version of it to take to Australia for this show, and I will call it the presentation of performance, because it will involve my live presence doing the voiceover and explaining, and there will be the music that is, there is no soundtrack, so it will all be, it'll be very primitive, a tape recorder, several tape recorders, and a slide projector to project titles that have not yet been put onto the film.
But I think there is a way in which I've seen you previously use tentative versions of works that are integrated into later works, rehearsals of works which are
I've always been
into works, and so that I mean, knowing your work now for a number of years, there is a way in which one can see a very kind of organic continuum between the work process and the finished work that emerges both in performance and in film, and so I would presume that this would constitute another instance of that.
Well, this will be different in that I now know pretty much what I want this film to be, so this particular presentation, I can't say that for sure. I was about to say it probably won't affect my final decisions, but I find that when I do these what I call crude presentations, I'm always affected by them. I learn something from them. So,
I am Annette Michelson, and I have been talking with Yvonne Rainer this evening. I will be talking again on Art Forum for 3 Fridays, I think, from now. That is the last Friday evening in February.